So this is John Costa at the Documentary Media Centre. It's Monday, the 8th of March, so it's International Women's Day. And I'm delighted to be joined by one of the partners here at the Documentary Media Centre, Sarah Reilly, who is the director of the Women's Research Centre. How are you?
I'm grand actually. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. Happy International Women's Day to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's lots of very exciting stuff happening across the world today and everything. Like loads of organisations are doing some really interesting things, and we've been having some interesting conversations or have some planned for this month as well.
That's good. Well, that's what I want to catch up with you about today, really, is we've often spoken, haven't we, about the thing with international days is great. Everybody tries to put into that day their own event and stuff. Whereas in fact, International Women's Month is actually quite a good thing because it allows us to spread things out a little bit and stuff. And I know you've got several things planned, hopefully including talking to my students and various blog posts and stuff. So who have you caught up with so far? I know you did an interview last Friday with someone in Germany. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, Dr. Anne Grafer, who's a researcher and also the director of her company Gender IQ, who provide training, workshops, lectures and advice on all aspects of gender diversity and inclusion. And the thing we sort of talked about a lot was the kind of the changing gender roles and the world of work, and like obviously COVID came up like quite a few times, because I know a lot of during this period, a lot of women have been kind of having to handle all the home situation, and there's been quite a lot of interesting kind of blogs and podcasts I've listened to very much about how the kind of a lot of women are having to be teachers, they're having to do full-time jobs, they're having to balance the home and everything. And so we just had quite an interesting chat about all that, really.
I guess one of the main things that will probably come out from lockdown as well is that kind of is gender roles, but
Mhm.
also opposite genders having to take over the other role as well. You know what I mean? Sort of, parents becoming teachers, maybe thinking a little bit more about, the conversation we have around teachers being daycare as well as educating our children,
Mhm.
as well as that kind of pressure there as well. And I think also within the home, amongst parents as well, being a bit more responsible, those that have gone out to work because they get away from the children, whereas the person left doing the primary childcare, are they ever leaving the children behind as well as doing the house and all this kind of stuff? It's really interesting. I think it's a good time to be having those kind of gender role conversations.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of groups who think that the kind of COVID pandemic has put women's rights back years, just because it seems to have reasserted those traditional sort of heteronormative gender roles. And it'd be quite interesting to see how things will be going forward. But COVID is also impacting women in other ways, like a lot of their industries that women tend to work in are very much kind of the ones where you're seeing more furlough, like the hospitality industry, retail. They've always traditionally been very much sort of what women's sort of jobs kind of thing, sort of traditional industry, I should say. So I think it's probably not just on within the home, but in a wider kind of women in society. I think very much it's caused a lot of changes to come about. We also talked about sort of pregnancy as well and work. And as you were saying, kind of with people sort of planning to have children, I know some of the things I've sort of listened to recently have said that women often have made like their very careful life plans. So they think, okay, I can work, I can have this number of children. Then, as you said, this childcare, they can go to school, and I can still have my role in my life and have a career. Whilst now, it's sort of very that they've really kind of been caught into question. And again, a lot of pregnant women have found that there have been more pressure on them to go on to furlough or to be made redundant. I'll go into that a bit more on the blog I'm going to write, as I've got some interesting
Mm,
stats. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, there's kind of quite a lot of linked issues that really seem to have highlighted during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to Tina here, Tina Barton, who's one of the people involved in the Doc Media Centre, like yourself and Paul as well, Dr. Paul Riley. She was watching Michelle Obama's Becoming, that's on one of the streaming platforms, and I watched it as well, actually, and it's probably one of the first things that I've seen about a woman that's in the public eye quite a lot, and I'm sure we won't get away without mentioning Meghan Merkel before the end of our chat's up,
No.
who's in that kind of public role, and she's very vocal in the documentary, talking a little bit about how she had to take a back seat with her career and look after the girls, and now it's her time. You know what I mean? It's it's not about being defined by who her husband is or what he was or what he did. It's about the fact that she's able to move forward now. I think, and I guess Meghan Merkel is a case in point, isn't it? It's a woman who's happy to be herself. Be confident, say who I am. Her history, speak her truth, if you like. And you come up against these old-fashioned systems and patriarchy that still pushes back against that and tries to find ways of destroying it using all the playground school techniques that we've all grown up with. And here we are, adults, having this conversation. It's interesting, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think, like, with the examples you've used as well, in those instances, the women have had to kind of give up their careers to kind of have that public role. Like, obviously, Meghan Markle had to give up not just her acting career, but she was a UN ambassador. She did a lot of charity work, and sort of in her own right, she had to shut down all of her social media as well. And that's often what she did a lot of her campaigning through, like through her Instagram account and such forth. And obviously Michelle Obama was a very successful lawyer in her own rights, which she also had to step aside when she became the first lady. And it's quite interesting because actually Dr. Jill Biden, our new first lady, is continuing to work and to teach. And I think that's a very positive sort of move forward as well, not expecting that because you're this first lady role, you're just supposed to sort of give up everything in order to support the male. And I think that's really kind of quite forward looking and quite old fashioned to always sort of accept that. Actually, one thing really interesting that Anne and I talked about in our discussion was the kind of the differences between the UK and Germany as well. Like there, it very, very much has a very traditional kind of structure, and that was kind of quite interesting. And like some of the little differences that we kind of things we take for granted here. I know she was saying that when obviously she lived and studied in the UK for a long time, and it's here where she did her PhD, and she sort of really noticed when she went back, she sort of goes into detail, sort of coming up against these very old-fashioned and traditionalist views, and like how even like advertisements were really, really sexist in how they were presented. And that was very enlightening as well. I think it's really important that we do look not just within our own country, but wider, and think, how can we do things better? How are we doing compared to them? So that was a really, really interesting discussion.
Yeah, and I think I have to also state as well that for people that say, oh, it's set back women's rights for this period of time, we've had this conversation ourselves, haven't we, about the Disability Act, you know what I mean? Sort of the Disability Rights Act. It's been set back and blah, blah, blah. And it's like anything, as soon as you've got something, you have to keep fighting for it, not think, well, now it's in law, I'll be okay. It's when it's in law that you have to use it. And there was a thing came out this morning in one of the tabloid newspapers where they talked to about 2,000 people about the women's roles in the armed forces. And they'll all know who Florence Nightingale is because it's a caring role, but they couldn't name the first woman who'd won the Military Cross, for example. I think it was in Iraq. She won it. I think her name's Corporal Nunn. I'm sure. No, Corporal Norris, because they call her nickname's Chuck Norris. And obviously, who we all know who Chuck Norris is. So it's really interesting. It's the person that her nickname's after is better known than for what she did. And we seem to we've got to move on beyond these traditional norms, haven't we, and start having those conversations about strong women being able to fulfill roles, and not even having conversations about are you capable of doing the job should be the norm, not you get paid less because you're a woman. You're obviously going to want to have a baby. You're obviously going to want time off and stuff. We've still not really moved beyond that, have we? Even in 2021.
Exactly, and I think actually the gender pay gap is still really, really high. And again, that was something we talked about with Anne, because I think it was 2019 was the first time in Germany that gender pay gap had got below 20%. And in this country, it's still kind of quite high. I think across full and part-time workers, it's about 17, I think. But it's kind of actual median pay for full-time workers isn't actually as far apart. But because more women have part-time roles, generally for a part-time role, they tend to be paid less than a full-time role, as in per hour. So that also kind of really sways the gender pay gap figures as well. So that's kind of there's always sort of little nuances that you just sort of don't really consider. I know something that I'm hoping to kind of go forward and sort of through the Women's Research Centre and discuss more is inclusion and illusion. And I think you can apply that very much to a lot of women's rights, because there's this theoretical, we can go out there and do it wherever we want and everything, when actually you come up against these barriers that we've literally just been discussing about. And I think it's really important that we just consider, investigate this a bit further and just sort of talk to different people with different experiences to try and sort of explore that area, because I think we need to.
Yeah, it's not just about telling people it exists and that's their rights. It's about saying to them, know your rights, learn them, be able to articulate them, be able to articulate. And I guess what we really need is strong, empowered women of any ethnicity or background or sexuality sitting in an interview, pushing back against some of that stuff, which is invariably where you come up against it, isn't it? Oh, you're going to want to do this, or obviously you wouldn't be able to do that. We need to educate people what those rights are so they can actually put those into practice day in, day out. And everybody has a role to play there, isn't it? Because that's the way you're going to bring about big change, not Michelle Obama or Meghan Merkel or Malala or anybody like this, or Greta Thunberg. We've got to start empowering young girls now to grow up with that as the norm.
Exactly, and to have these discussions and encourage them to have not just to sit quietly and think, oh, this is my place. It's to challenge those who you come up against. I think it's really important as well, and just educate others and talk about it. I think you can't really sort of yeah, definitely. I think that's just really important. And but you obviously need people kind of who are sort of in those sort of higher up roles who are a bit older now to also starting to be doing stuff. It's kind of like going through those different layers. But obviously, I know you can chip away, but hopefully one day we'll all kind of come to something in the end and everything. But obviously, flexible working hours have really only come about. Was it 2004? I think it was. So we've kind of that's kind of quite a few years back, and it'd be quite interesting to see how much that's actually kind of being used in reality as well.
Okay, final question. How do we start getting some of this stuff into educational settings in schools? Is it through things like the Gatsby benchmarks, where young people, if you give them, I think it's between 4 and 6 opportunities to engage with business outside of the school during their school time, they're more likely to be aware of what business is and get involved in it, almost like a careers? Or is it something we've got to do something structured? Should it be taught in citizenship? Or do we need to overhaul things like history, and science, and start talking about some of these great breakthroughs that women, and a lot of the stuff as well, people acknowledge now that some of the greatest breakthroughs and inventions that we think the men did, in fact, it was like women, and in some cases their wives, that they couldn't publish it without the man being the person that's on it. What do you think about education? How do we chip away at that?
I think it's important to educate everybody, because obviously you need men to be as sort of aware of these issues as much as women really as well. And because I think we need to have allies wherever. I think that's definitely very important, sort of move forward. And I suppose in some ways to be given those practical tools of, if you come up against this situation, how do you react towards it as well? So again, it's not that just here's all the education and the theory behind. Yeah, of course, it's really important that we need to acknowledge sort of historical figures and try and rebalance history in so many ways. I mean, obviously you can say that across the board with many kind of sort of areas as well. Like the Black Lives Matter movement have very much kind of looked at sort of, should we kind of teach colonialism and everything as like we have been doing? We need to rebalance history in that way. I think that's very important. But ultimately you can teach the history and empower people, but then if they're not given the tools to then go out and sort of put that into practice, then I think you kind of it's going to really slow things down. It's sort of it's like practice, theory and practice kind of thing.
And just one final thing, just to end maybe on a more contemporary note. Now, I know you're a big sort of His Dark Materials fan, and we've had many conversations between the four of us about that, haven't we? And it was interesting in the last series that towards the end of the second series, when Mrs. Coulter, some spoilers here, if anybody who's not watched the end, Mrs. Coulter comes to our world, if you like. She's absolutely shocked that there's a female professor, academic, who is able to publish work under her own name, because where she is under the magisterium back in her world, she can only publish something if it's in a man's name and stuff. And so there's all these little subtle messages, and some people might see that and think that's absolutely outrageous and you shouldn't stand up for it and all that, yet people put up with it in the world now, don't they?
No, I think that's true, but I suppose she was astonished because she'd never seen it really as well. And I think it's kind of, oh, I can do that sort of thing. I think that's really important to have, definitely. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's
We've
really
got a long way to go yet, haven't we?
Exactly. I do love the fact that Lyra's such a strong character in it, and she is the central character, I think, in the His Dark Materials kind of series and everything. And I think it would have been quite easy to have kind of made Will kind of on a par when she is the true core of it all. And I think that's really brilliant as well.
Well, again, I guess young girls only pick up on that when it's reflected in the world that's around them, isn't it? So it needs to be reflected in that way. Well, it's lovely talking to you. As I said, happy International Women's Day. I'm sure you're going to be busy for the rest of the day, catching up with various people, doing the blog that you've got coming up as well. And I look forward to catching up with you.
Exactly. I'm going to have a nice chat with Molly O'Brien again, who we spoke to on our International Day of People with Disabilities. And we're going to record a chat where we talk about kind of sort of how disabled women tend to get a lot of kind of impounded and sort of discrimination, like double discrimination almost. So we're going to have a chat about that, which we'll put up in the next week or so. But yeah, we've got a lot of other people coming up in the pipework, so we'll see.
Good stuff. Lovely. Thanks for talking to us, Sarah. I hope you have a good
So
day.
much. You too. Bye bye.